All right, welcome back. In this video, we are going to look at what the model that we just generated includes. So in the prior video, we just made a new model called recipe. We made that with our command flask make model and then recipe. And remember, we gave the model a singular name, capitalized it. So that was this recipe right here. And you end up with a file on disk. You end up with one file and you end up with a modification of another file. So I still have my application up and running here. Here's my hello world. Let's go to VS Code because really we're going to spend most of our time here. And I'm going to use the terminal a little bit. So I actually have it all pulled up, but let me show you how I got here. So in my project, under app, under models, we had one file got changed, modified. It's our models dunder init file. And so recipes got included in there. And then another file got created, which was recipe. Now, I will agree this file looks a little bit heavy at first, especially now. Now I have actually, let's go and do this. I've actually minified it. So if I make it look like that, it doesn't look too bad. But when you look at the full file, it does look a little bit scary at first, especially if you're new to web programming or maybe even new to Python programming. But we're going to debunk this. We're going to go through this line by line, and it may be a little bit of a longer video in order to do that. But let's do that now. Now, full disclosure, I am actually upgraded. So this is Flask Commands -v. I'm actually using version 04 now. And in version 03, the make model created a slightly smaller file, a little bit smaller file, and one less method. I could never remember. I mean, I had trouble remembering some of the naming of these methods that I had created or had worked with others on creating. It just seemed more natural to do normal CRUD, which is create, update, and delete. And so that's what I did. I changed those names in 04. And I did a bit of a protection here, and we'll go through all that. So let's start at the beginning. Let's not get too scared off because a model is just simply a Python class. And so that's what we have here. We have a class that's a Python class, and it's extending another Python class. So if you're unfamiliar with object-oriented programming, just think of this as a template that you're going to build things from this template. And that's really what's going on here. Now, I also like to think of this as the connector between our Python coding world of our application and our database world, where we get to see all the rows of data in some table. Now, I happen to use Table Plus. It's a great little tool that lets me actually see that data. We haven't migrated this over, so we won't be able to see it in Table Plus, but we'll do that in the coming video, actually. So for now, this is all going to live in the Python world because it's a class. Now, I should have access to recipe here. And so in my Flask shell, I should be able to type in recipe. Let's just check it out. Okay, sure enough, I do. And so we will use this to kind of understand what's going on here. Now, the first line here is telling, it's going back to that connection, and it's saying, okay, when you make the table, here's the name I want to give the table. And it always, it does the best it can, pluralizes the model name. So if it's some English word that has a little bit of a non-standard pluralization, it's just going to do the best it can, because I didn't want to write some massive pluralization library. That's not really what Flask Commands was about, so it just does the best it can. So if you see something weird up here and it's not the right pluralization, then just change it so that it is the correct pluralization, and that's what the table name will appear in Table Plus when we do the migration. If those were a lot of words that you didn't understand, don't worry, we're going to get to that. Just know that if this looks a little odd to you as far as the S goes on here, just make the update. Okay, now there are kind of two sections here, and that's why I was doing this. So there's a section on columns, and then there's a section on methods. Methods are just functions of a class, right? So the section on columns, every model comes shipped with 3 columns: ID, created at, and updated at. ID is an integer column, and it is used to identify the row. You're going to say, this is row 1, 2, 3, or this is row 5, 6, 7, something like that. It's very helpful to have an ID on a row, because oftentimes you need to single out to either read it or update it or delete it, right? I have seen database tables without IDs on them, and especially if all the columns have the exact same values in them, it can become really hard to target just one of those rows. And so it's always good to have an ID. Now, there are pivot tables, and I don't want to get into too deep in the weeds there, that you may not see like an actual ID on that. Okay, so, but that's what this one is. So it's just incrementally counting as you create new instances of the model. And this is actually done for us behind the scenes. So it will start with 1, and then go to 2, and then 3, and then 4, etc. Then there are 2 what are called timestamps. There's a created at and an updated at, and they do exactly what you think. So created at it gets defined by default with a timestamp, and I always put things in UTC time. So I don't personally live in UTC time, but we always take the time, convert it from like whatever the time is, like right now, or what the user may have entered, and we convert it from their local time zone into UTC time and store it in the database. And then when we read it out of the database, we take it from UTC time and put it into their time zone. That's often how I end up writing applications to do this. So you have some kind of getter and setter, and then you do a conversion in that. But this is storing right now, so it's going using the datetime library and calling datetime. So you may actually see datetime.datetime. I just said from datetime import datetime, and then datetime.now is getting the right now in the time zone of UTC. And so that's setting the created at. Updated at is doing the exact same thing here, but it has an additional on update. And so if one of the columns in your instance, one of the attributes of your instance gets changed, one of the columns in your database for that row gets changed, then update will just, on saving it, it will magically get the current UTC time. So that's what those three columns are. See, they're not that scary, right? Now, this doesn't have anything specific about a recipe, right? And that's intended. You need to come in here and add in your columns that define the model that you just created. So, and this is one of the many reasons why I built Flask Commands, was because just to get started, there was so much boilerplate that I needed for just a single model. And now I can just type in Flask make model and the model name, and I get all this out. And there's not this like kind of mental hurdle for me just to start writing class and the definite columns that I'm going to put in every single class. For me, I'm like, these are non-negotiable. Except for, if, as I kind of mentioned, if it was a pivot table, I probably would just remove that one. Okay, so then let's talk about these. And there are 4 methods here. 3 of the methods that are in purple are methods that they affect the database, right? And so they're creating something, storing it in the database, giving it back to you in memory, updating something. So you have a row from the database, you want to make some changes to that row and store those changes in the database, right? And then deleting is a destructive action where it removes that row from the database. So, and then there's a 4th one, which is a magic method. And if you print your instance of a recipe, then it will call this method and print out what you return from this method. So let's go through these one at a time, and I'm kind of hiding them because at first glance they may seem overwhelming, and I know they are for me, especially when you start throwing in these like dunder methods in here, like this thing. So I don't want you to get scared. So let's go very slowly. So this is setting up a value called, my notes over here. This is setting up a value called valid attributes. And it's not like a super scary thing. So and the value is it's a set, right? So squiggly brackets. We use this in Python for set notation, and we use it for dictionaries. So either this was going to be a dictionary or it was going to be a set of things. So set, you could think of mathematicians, that's me, it's just a set. For programmers, non-ordered list, if you want. List, you use the brackets, right? Okay, so it's iterating over this thing here, and it's taking, so this is some kind of iterable thing, and this is an instance of that iterable thing, and it's taking that and putting the key attribute of that thing here in this set. Okay, so let's play this out like in our terminals so it doesn't look so crazy scary. So I'm just going to iterate. So I'm going to say for, and if you want, I can, just so you know I'm not fooling you, we'll put this over here and this over here. What's that? Okay. So for, and then, oh, I should mention this too. So this first one is a class method, and that's what this decorator is doing. It's saying, hey, I'm about to make a class method. You're like, what is a class method? Okay, class methods, class methods are methods that you can call on the class without having the an instance of the class. Usually you would do this, recipe equals recipe. Like now I have an instance of recipe. So then I would do recipe.create. And that would be a normal method, but we are a class method and we are going to create a recipe, so we don't actually have a recipe to call create on at this point. And so that is why there's this decorator up here. All right, so the way I would actually call this is recipe equals recipe, and then I don't need I'm not making an instance of it yet, and then create. Okay, so that's how I'm going to call this, which is a little bit different than the way I would call a regular method or an instance method. So I said that because you see from being passed in, you have to pass in the class, CLS. Well, the class here is actually this model. And that's a little confusing if you're first new, but it's the same kind of here. It's self for update. So in this one, if you do, because this is not a class method, this is a regular instance method. If you do update, then the self here is the instance of recipe. Now, if you've taken computer science classes, then that's going to be old hat to you. If that's new to you, then just kind of soak that in. You may have to hear me say that a couple more times to get it, but just know that CLS in this case is representing, don't do that. CLS is representing capital recipe. So, because we're going to call this like this, recipe equals recipe.create. Okay, so the CLS is representing this thing before the dot, recipe. So when I'm coming down here, I need to say all that because I need to write this line here. This is capital recipe. Okay, good. So let's see what this does. So if I do for attribute in recipe dot dunder mapper dot column attributes, then now I'm going to put a colon here because this is how we write for statements, iterate over for statements. And then I can just, let's print attribute dot key. Let's see what we get. And notice what we got. We ended up with all the columns. And that's exactly what this is doing. So this is taking all the columns And if you had put another column in here, it would be a new attribute. So you would define it with db column, and then that would add to this list down here, which would put it in this set of valid attributes. So we can actually make this variable valid attributes equals, and then we will do this all in kind of one line. Attribute key for then this deal here. It's gonna make it really long and end that like that. So we're just gonna end up with this list. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. Okay, so then this next step is, these are valid attributes. You're gonna pass in some attributes, and these attributes are actually gonna come to you in dictionary form. So that means key value pair. And I'm gonna take that and turn them into a list, or not a list, a set. So let's give you an example of what I'm saying here, because I'm kind of saying a lot. So let's do the attributes. And then I'm actually gonna see if I can bring this up, because I don't want you all to see this at the very bottom of your screen. Okay, so attributes equals, and then I'm gonna make a dictionary. So again, if you're not familiar with Python, this may be a new concept, but let's say that I have this, and maybe I'm bringing in name, and we'll just put my name in here. Okay, so I have valid attributes, which is updated at, ID, and created at, and attributes, which is a dictionary that says the ID key has a value of 1, and the name key has a value of true. All right, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these attributes into a set. So if I do that, it's just going to get, notice it just gets the keys, ID and name, and there's no order to a Python dictionary. Like, we kind of think of this, that we put ID in first and then name, just because that's the way we typed it, but there's not necessarily an order here. So and we don't need ordering because we are dealing with sets. So I have this, I passed in ID and I passed in name, but the model itself actually it has ID, but it doesn't have name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the attributes that we passed in, and then I'm going to subtract the valid attributes. And by putting this set around it, I strip off the values and I just get the keys. So it's the keys of the dictionary that we passed in, and then we're subtracting out the values. And this is just taking two sets and taking the difference. And so if you have name and ID, and then you have updated at, ID, and created at, the ID is going to get removed because it's in both sets, it's in the intersection, and you're just going to be left with name, because name is not in this set. And so we end up with name. So, and then if we put sorted around it, I believe it turns it into a list is what it does. So I can put sorted, and then a set is not ordered, so sorted is gonna turn it into a list, and in this case there was only one value, but if there had been multiple values it would have ordered them alphabetically. So what this does is you're passing in this dictionary, and it's going through and it's looking and it's saying, hey, well, these are the columns that I have. What did you pass in? Because you can't pass in things that I don't have columns for. And if you do, then I'm going to define those as invalid attributes. And if I have invalid attributes, I'm going to take that list, which is now a list because we sorted it, and I'm going to concatenate it all together with commas in between and a space, and I'm going to say, hey, I have an unknown, and then this is going to be the class name, which is recipe, unknown recipe attributes, and then tell you what they are, and I'm going to raise an attribute error. Like, we don't have those, so I'm going to bail, and I'm not going to do anything else. I'm not going to add this to my session. I'm not going to commit the session, so I'm not saving anything in the database. Now, if invalid attributes is empty, then I'm going to skip over this. So if everything you passed in is some subset of the things that I have here, I'm going to skip over this attribute error raising, and I'm going to create an instance of the class. That's what this does. And then I am going to I'm going to take my instance and I'm going to set each attribute to the value of what you passed in. So this is what you passed in, and then I get the items, and so this iterates over that. So we can even see that if you want. We can just copy this, because we have attributes. Attributes was defined, let's see, right here. It's ID and name. And so I can print the attribute. We'll print here, attribute, and put a comma and value. This will print out both of the things here. So attribute ID has value 1. Attribute name has value Drew. So it's setting ID to 1, and then it's setting name to Drew on the instance that we created. So that's what this bit of code is doing. And then it's making that connection back to our database and storing this, and so that we can see this in our table plus. So that's what these two lines are doing. And then it returns the instance. And so that's why when we called something like this, we would have, it would be called like this: recipe equals, this return instance is what we're getting here, recipe.create, and then what I want to do is just passing in a dictionary. So I'm going to have, like, in this case, I would say ID is 1 and name is Drew, and I should get, I should get an error here, an attribute error, unknown recipe attribute, name, which is exactly what we expected. Great. We'll add in name as a column, and then I won't get this error. And we won't actually have to add in ID because because it is our primary key, it'll just be created for us, and we'll see that. All right, so that was a lot, and I realize that, but fortunately, update reuses that same logic, and so we don't have to go over it again. So again, you're passing in attributes. It figures out what the valid attributes are, and then from the valid attributes, it takes your attributes and calculates the invalid attributes. And if there are invalid attributes, it does the exact same thing of raising that attribute error. Whew, that was a lot, right? And then it stores those on self. In this case, we don't have to create the instance because we already have the instance. And then it commits the changes to the database, and it returns self. So this is kind of optional. You probably will just have an instance of recipe. So you'll say recipe equals recipe, something like this. And then you'll just say recipe dot update, and you'll pass in a dictionary. So like, I want to rename this thing. And right now there is no name property, but we'll put my last name in or something like that. And I should get an attribute error when I run this. But I would probably do it like this. I just made it so that if for whatever reason you wanted to do it like that and get the thing back, but the thing that you're getting back and the original thing are both going to get updated. So, but just so you can see, this will raise an attribute error. There it is, unknown recipe attribute name. Okay, now delete is very simple. It's destructive. It just adds self to the session as a delete, and it commits that. Okay, and then this is cool because it will, if I try to do this, print recipe, it will do this. It takes what's here and prints it. Now notice I'm getting none, and that is because we haven't saved it to the database yet. And we can't save it to the database because we haven't made our migration. So we'll do all that in the next video. So see you in the next video. All right, so that was magic. That was the magic rep method. All right, see you in the next video.